The room grew quiet the moment the blind date began to fall apart. A few people sitting near the cafe windows exchanged awkward glances. Someone looked down at their coffee. Someone else shook their head as if they already knew how the afternoon would end. They had convinced themselves that this meeting was a mistake before it even started. A hard-working black single father and a young deaf woman from a completely different world seemed like an impossible match. Yet none of them expected what would happen next. And when the father finally spoke, his words would leave every person in that cafe completely silent. Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of hope, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to the channel Heartwarming Tales for more inspiring stories. The father's name was Tavian Brooks. At 36 years old, he carried the weight of 2 lives on his shoulders. Ever since his wife passed away from an illness several years earlier, he had raised his 8-year-old daughter, Zaria, alone. Every day began before sunrise. He prepared breakfast, packed lunches, worked long hours repairing air conditioning systems, helped with homework, cooked dinner, and somehow still found enough energy to tuck his daughter into bed with a bedtime story. People often admired Tavian's dedication, but very few understood the loneliness that followed him everywhere. While friends built new relationships and planned vacations, Tavian focused entirely on survival and parenthood. Dating felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. That was why he immediately refused when his co-workers suggested a blind date. 4 weeks they insisted. They claimed they knew someone special. They promised she was kind, intelligent, and compassionate. Eventually, after endless encouragement and pressure, Tavian reluctantly agreed. The date was scheduled for a sunny Saturday afternoon at a small community cafe near Riverside Park. As Tavian arrived, nervousness settled heavily in his chest. He adjusted the sleeves of his neatly pressed shirt and reminded himself that this was only a conversation. Across the room sat a woman named Selah Moreno. She had warm eyes, calm confidence, and a gentle smile. A notebook rested beside her coffee cup. When Tavian approached, she greeted him with a friendly wave. The first few minutes felt awkward. Selah communicated primarily through sign language and written notes. Tavian knew no sign language whatsoever. Their conversation moved slowly. Questions that normally took seconds required several minutes. A few nearby customers occasionally glanced toward them. Tavian noticed the pity in some faces. He hated it. Not because Selah was deaf. Because people seemed to assume that 2 human beings couldn't connect simply because communication required extra effort. Meanwhile, Selah sensed the same judgment. She had experienced it her entire life. People often treated her deafness as a limitation rather than a different way of experiencing the world. Many dates ended quickly after discovering communication wasn't effortless. As the afternoon continued, misunderstandings accumulated. A few comments had to be rewritten multiple times. Several jokes lost their meaning entirely. From a distance, the date looked uncomfortable. A group of Tavian's co-workers happened to stop by the cafe. Seeing the situation, they exchanged embarrassed looks. One whispered that maybe they had made a mistake setting this up. Another quietly suggested Tavian would probably leave early. Then something unexpected happened. Selah wrote a question in her notebook. She asked what being a father had taught him. The question stopped Tavian completely. For a moment he stared at the words. Then he smiled. He began writing. He wrote about sleepless nights when Zaria was sick. He wrote about learning to braid hair by watching online videos. He wrote about making mistakes, apologizing, and trying again. He wrote about discovering strength he never knew existed. As Selah read, tears gathered in her eyes. She responded with stories of her own. She described growing up deaf in a world that constantly expected her to adapt. She described overcoming assumptions, earning a degree in graphic design, and mentoring deaf children who struggled with confidence. For the first time all afternoon, they weren't talking about surface-level details. They were talking about resilience. About perseverance. About finding light during difficult seasons. Hours passed unnoticed. The cafe slowly emptied. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting golden patterns across the tables. Yet the most important moment was still ahead. A little later, Zarya unexpectedly arrived with Tavian's sister, who had been watching her nearby. The young girl ran toward her father excitedly. Sayla immediately smiled. Using sign language, she greeted Zarya. To everyone's surprise, Zarya enthusiastically signed back. Tavian stared in disbelief. Apparently, Zarya had been learning basic sign language at school as part of an inclusion program. Within moments, the two were laughing and communicating effortlessly. Watching them together stirred something deep inside Tavian. For years he had worried that no one would ever truly understand the complicated world he lived in as a single parent. Yet here was someone connecting with his daughter naturally and sincerely. Nearby, the co-workers continued watching. They expected politeness. What they witnessed instead was genuine connection. Then one of them approached the table and awkwardly apologized for interrupting. He admitted they had doubts. He admitted they weren't sure the date would work. The entire cafe seemed to grow quieter. Tavian looked at Sayla. Then he looked around the room. Finally, he spoke. His voice carried calmly across the cafe. He said that everyone kept focusing on what Sayla couldn't hear, but nobody seemed interested in what she could understand. He said communication wasn't about perfect words. It was about patience, effort, and caring enough to meet someone where they are. He explained that in just a few hours, Sayla had understood more about his struggles, dreams, and hopes than many people had in years. Silence filled the room. No one knew what to say. Because every person there realized he was right. The obstacle had never been Sayla's deafness. The obstacle had been other people's assumptions. Sayla's eyes filled with emotion. For perhaps the first time on a date, she didn't feel judged, analyzed, or treated differently. She simply felt seen. Over the following months, their friendship grew steadily. There were challenges, of course. Tavian dedicated himself to learning sign language. He practiced every evening after work. Zarya often helped him correct mistakes. Sayla became a beloved part of their small family circle. She attended school events, community gatherings, and weekend picnics. Together, they discovered that meaningful relationships aren't built on convenience. They're built on commitment. 1 year later, the same cafe hosted a community celebration. Many of the people who had witnessed that first blind date attended. This time there were no awkward glances. No pity. No assumptions. Only smiles. Because everyone could see the happiness that had grown from a single afternoon when two people chose understanding over judgment. Special request: if this story touched your heart, comment below with, "Kindness speaks louder." If this story inspired you or reminded you of the power of kindness, please like, share, and subscribe to Heartwarming Tales so more people can discover stories that bring hope and encouragement. As the evening sunlight illuminated the cafe windows once again, Tavian reflected on how close he had come to saying no to that blind date. Life's greatest blessings often arrive disguised as unexpected opportunities. The people who change our lives are not always the people we expect. Sometimes they are the ones who teach us to see beyond appearances, beyond assumptions, and beyond fear. The lesson was simple yet powerful: when we approach others with patience, compassion, and an open heart, we discover connections that can transform our lives forever. And in a world that often rushes to judge, choosing understanding may be the most beautiful act of kindness of all.